trị, con số hơn 1 triệu tỷ đồng mà bà Trương Mỹ Lan, Chủ tịch tập đoàn Vạn Thịnh Phát cùng đồng phạm.
Vậy rốt cuộc bà Trương Mỹ Lan làm thế nào để có thể rút hàng trăm ngàn tỷ tiền mặt trong suốt 10 năm?
There has never been a case with such enormous numbers in the history of Vietnam's financial sector. 1,066,000 billion VN yen is the amount that Mrs. Trương Mỹ Lan quietly withdrew from SCB Bank. If you can't quite grasp it, this is equivalent to nearly 11% of Vietnam's entire GDP in 2022. In other words, it's about 1/10 of the total value of goods produced by all of Vietnam in 2022. Terrifying. Among this, 304,096 billion VND is the amount Mrs. Lan embezzled for herself. Although it's only 1/3 of the above figure, it is still larger than the combined total assets of the 5 richest billionaires in Vietnam, and when compared internationally, it's equivalent to the top 3 largest financial frauds in the world. So, let's explore how the largest embezzlement case to date was carried out. 1. Origin. First, we will start with the origin of everything, which is this woman. This is Mrs. Trương Mỹ Lan, whose real name is Trương Mui, born in 1956 in Ho Chi Minh City, and is of Chinese-Vietnamese descent. The Trương family is known as one of the wealthiest families in Vietnam, but they are also very private in the media. Therefore, information about this family is rarely made public. As a result, the numbers we know may not fully reflect the hidden assets of this family and their family company, Vạn Thịnh Phát. Based on officially released information, we know that Mrs. TML founded Vạn Thịnh Phát Co. Ltd. in 1992. In 2007, it was transformed into a joint stock company, increasing its capital to 6,000 billion VND, with Mrs. Lan controlling up to 80%. From here, under her leadership, the group developed numerous major projects within its ecosystem through hundreds of subsidiaries. To date, the group owns many high-rise buildings in central locations, golden land areas, and numerous projects in prime locations in Ho Chi Minh City. One common characteristic of companies within the VTP system is that most have very large charter capital, ranging from several thousand to tens of thousands of billion VND, equivalent to medium-sized enterprises on the stock exchange. In the media, there is never a shortage of shocking information about this group, such as acquiring golden land and creating mega projects that are then left idle. Now, the secrets of the VTP empire have officially been revealed. Two violations. The case of Mrs. TML was brought to public attention in October 2022 when Mrs. Lan, along with senior leaders of SCB and Tan Viet, was announced to be arrested by the Ministry of Public Security. Mrs. Lan's group executed their scheme based on 2 main pillars. 1. Falsifying documents to withdraw money from SCB, and 2. Concealing the dirty money using the VTP ecosystem and bribing high-ranking officials. First factor, exploiting bank fundraising activities for personal and business needs. With this policy, Mrs. Lan acquired 3 private banks by purchasing the majority shares of these banks to manipulate their operations for personal purposes. Since December 2011, through proxy shareholders, TML held 81.43% of the shares of Saigon Commercial Bank, formerly 98.74% of the shares of Vietnam Tinh Nha Commercial Bank, and 80.46% of the shares of Dai Nhat Commercial Bank. On January 1, 2012, these 3 banks were merged into Saigon Commercial Bank, now SCB, and Mrs. Lan, through 73 proxy shareholders, owned 91.5% of the bank's shares. With this control, Mrs. Lan could easily place trusted individuals into key positions at SCB, paying them high salaries ranging from 200 to 500 million VN per month. This allowed her to use the bank as a financial tool to mobilize deposits from the public and organizations and raise funds from sources beyond the regulations of the credit institution's law for her personal purposes. Second factor, VTP's complex ecosystem. During its operations, VTP Group built an ecosystem with over 1,000 companies, including subsidiaries and affiliates both domestically and internationally. This ecosystem was structured in multiple layers, with hundreds of individuals hired as legal representatives or related to VTP's staff. The VTP ecosystem is divided into 4 main groups with close relations. 1. Financial companies in Vietnam for withdrawing money and providing funding, including SCB, Tan Viet Securities Company, and Viet Vinh Phu Financial Investment Joint Stock Company, with SCB used as a financial tool to fund companies within the VTP ecosystem. 2 companies with business activities in Vietnam, large firms in real estate, restaurants, and hotels, to create projects attracting investor funds. 3. Shell companies in Vietnam established to obtain legal status for borrowing from banks, investing in projects, restructuring debt, or signing contracts to make projects appear as though they are funded by reputable investors. 4 foreign companies in tax havens to transfer dirty money abroad and evade taxes. Implementation method. Through trusted individuals at SCB and VTP, TML executed schemes to withdraw bank money by creating fictitious loan applications. Each withdrawn amount was allocated to various subsidiaries to create shell companies, devise investment plans, and inflate asset valuations. Most of VTP's loans were withdrawn in advance and legitimized later. The loan documents used by this group had tracking symbols like HSTT, head office marketing, and plans projects so bank staff could quickly process them. Mrs. Lan's group also established thousands of legal entities, hiring thousands of individuals as legal representatives to sign loan documents and secure assets to legitimize the withdrawals. The pool of legal entities grew larger to avoid having excessively large credit balances during audits. To withdraw money and bypass the CIC, credit balance checking system, Mrs. Lan directed SCB staff to transfer funds to shell companies, which were then shuffled between companies in the ecosystem, and finally withdrawn as cash to sever the cash flow. 93% of SCB's cash was withdrawn through this process, solely to serve Mrs. Lan's group. Bribing high-ranking officials. Of course, to maintain control over the situation for an extended period, assistance from 85 other suspects, including high-ranking officials from inspection agencies, banks, and valuation firms, was essential. These individuals, who should have brought the case to light, acted against their conscience for financial gain. Prominent examples include Do Thi Nhan, the director of the inspection department, who received $5.2 million, the highest amount in the case, and Nguyen Van Hung, deputy chief inspector, who received a total of $390,000, along with other inspection team members who received between $1,000 and $21,000 in bribes. In a report on SCB's inspection results presented to the government, Ms. Nan instructed to only provide general information, not report figures, and not highlight SCB's financial weaknesses to obscure SCB's violations. Even when an inspection team member proposed placing SCB under special control, Mr. Hung removed this from the report and suggested the government continue supporting SCB's restructuring. Additionally, there were many other related leaders, some of whom died suddenly, preventing further information gathering, such as Mrs. Nguyen Phuong Hong, a member of SCB's board of directors, who died 2 days after being arrested, and Mr. Nguyen Tien Than, chairman and CEO of Tan Viet Securities Joint Stock Company, who died mysteriously just before the VTP case was exposed. 3. The outcome. In reality, before officially being arrested, the group had been involved in numerous economic violations over the past 4 to 5 years, but had not been held accountable. These violations include issues with the construction of the 20th Phat building, illegal land use on Nguyen Du Street, violations of guarantees at SCB, involvement with Dream Republic and Sheen mega companies in abandoning bids worth thousands of billion VN at the Tu Thiem land auction, similar to Tan Hong Min, and Mrs. Lan and her husband were also named in the Panama Papers for money laundering. The entire family had applied to renounce Vietnamese citizenship to emigrate abroad in 2014, but was not approved. Recently, with sufficient evidence, the Ministry of Public Security officially charged Mrs. Lan with 3 crimes: bribery, violation of banking regulations, and embezzlement. Over a decade from 2012 to 2022, Mrs. Lan's team siphoned over 1 trillion VND from SCB, all of which were public deposits. As of October 17, 2022, there were more than 677,286 billion VN in bad debts that were unrecoverable. Now the important question is how the embezzled deposits at SCB will be handled. Some of the potential solutions being considered are selling VTP's assets in Vietnam to recover the lost funds, estimated to take over 10 years. The assets being recovered could amount to 30 to 50% of the 300 billion VND that Mrs. Lan embezzled. Exerting pressure to sell assets abroad to transfer money back to Vietnam, estimated to also take a few years. Restructuring SCB to generate profits and use those profits to offset the losses a few decades. Estimations suggest SCB could lose 196 billion VND after recovering secured assets for VTP's loans and 229 billion VND in interest and fees receivable. The total loss could amount to about 330 billion VND, equivalent to 44% of SCB's total assets at the current time. The positive aspect is that SCB has not been heavily involved in the interbank system for a long time, so its interbank borrowings are almost negligible. Therefore, the impact will be a burden on SCB's own restructuring rather than affecting the broader banking system and other banks. 4. Closing remarks. It is staggering to realize that a powerful empire like VTP is actually a large-scale criminal organization, employing a sophisticated and blatant scam to rob innocent people and manipulate the highest legal authorities. The immense figures involved mean that this case will have significant impacts on various sectors of the economy, such as the safety of the banking system, investor confidence, and the state's credibility in managing violations. Those at the center of this scandal, including Mrs. TML, her accomplices, and the bribed officials, must be appropriately punished to prevent future repercussions. However, the consequences of this massive case will take a long time to address, and the story of it will be recounted for many years to come.